When we watched Sean Omalley blast through opponents, we could clearly see that there was something special about his abilities, but even though he could put on a show, it wasn't really enough, was it? So what was needed next was a test, and not just any test, a ferocious opponent that could legitimize Sean O'Malley's place in the division. And the guy to step up to that challenge was none other than the former champ Petr No Mercy Yan. The fight between them was interesting because when they clashed, there was something unique about how this fight played out. Sean Omalley was taken into the deepest depths of Yan's storm, and this forced him into a different kind of fight that he was not used to experiencing. Omalley couldn't blast through Yan with such ease, but by the same token, Yan didn't have an easy road either, and this was what made the fight even more entertaining to study. This fight had its moments of crazy back and forth. You would see Omalley stun Yan, but you'd also see Yan getting his revenge and hammering Omalley back. This fight is shrouded in controversy over who won, and I'll let you decide that, but my goal here is to tell you the story of the fascinating technical battle that took place and what that might mean moving forward. So we're here again to break down their signature tactics and look at some of their interesting habits. It's no mystery that Omalley is a tall, rangy fighter, so right off the bat, Yan needed to close that distance in order to work his craft, and that's exactly what Yan did. Omalley fights well at distance. Naturally, that's what he tried to do, but this wasn't a typical fight where we could easily see him land counters moving on that back foot. Yan isn't some ordinary fighter, and he's not going to be lured into shots so easily, and this is what separates him from the lower ranks of the division. He's equipped with so many skills to close that distance. Whenever he followed up with Omalley, Yan would always masterfully maintain a safe distance. Now this is really important to keep in mind because this dictated the flow of the fight. You see, when we look back at O'Malley's previous opponents, like Chris Moutinho, Chris would typically follow up into O'Malley's range, but he would always do it right into O'Malley's striking zone, and he did it very carelessly, so as a result, you saw him get pieced up a lot. With Yan, it was a completely different story, and this highlights why this fight looked so different. As Omalley took a step somewhere, Yan would take that same equal step to cut him off, but he would never enter that striking zone carelessly. This is something to keep in mind to take away if you ever want to stalk down an opponent. To illustrate this, watch how Yan follows up. He never really gets in too close to the range of O'Malley's circle right there. But when he does go into range, stalking him down, being very careful, he'll throw his attack and then disable his own weapons so that he can go in safely into that range. And again, you notice Yan never going too close into that range as he follows up, always maintaining that safe distance. What this meant was that Omalley couldn't just land his usual counters that he could on the back foot as much against an opponent as competent as Yan. This is what made the matchup unique because Yan wouldn't allow Omalley to find success off the back foot as much. This also meant if Omalley was to land his shots, it was likely not going to be off the back foot. If he was going to find success, it was going to have to be through other aspects of the fight. So this leaves you wondering, where did Omalley find success in this fight then? We'll actually reveal that later on in the fight as things get heated. When it came to Omalley finding success countering on the back foot, it just wasn't there as much. Yan was very careful about closing that gap, and he would often stalk Omalley, forcing him back to the cage. Now forcing Omalley to the cage proved to be effective because this allowed Yan to land all sorts of attacks. He would often shoot to the hips to catch takedowns and land them successfully with Omalley backed into the corner, although Omalley did a good job of scrambling and posturing his way back to his neutral positions. Since this was working, cutting off Omalley became a central part of Yan's strategy, so sure enough, it became really important for him to do it carefully and effectively. A really effective method of cutting Omalley off was by carefully cutting off one side and using body kicks to catch Omalley moving laterally. Now, we explored this strategy in one of my earlier breakdowns where we saw how it was particularly useful for Yan to use this against long evasive fighters like Corey Sandhagen. Now, when Corey would look to play keep away, Yan would stalk him down on one side and use those body kicks to cut him off on the other side. Here you see Yan stalking him down and using those kicks to catch him on the lateral movement. To me, this fight had a lot of style and flair in it because of the unique skills that these fighters bring to the table, like Yan's habit of dumping opponents from his trips. Yan managed to pull off. There's something interesting about the trips I want to share, but before we get into that, give me a minute to tell you about this next thing. Have you ever played casino games online and felt like you are not in control of your funds? Or maybe you've heard of cases where centralized casinos mishandle their customers' funds. centralized casinos can have a lot of conflicts of interest when it comes to the casino space. If you're looking for a safer, more secure way to play casino games online, then you need to check out BNBP, the decentralized casino service that puts you in control of your funds. At BNBP, you could stake your tokens and earn fees, and the best part, 100% of the fees go back to bettering the community of holders, making sure that everyone benefits from the platform's success. You also have a few benefits of owning the BNB coin, and one of them is reduced fees. The other benefit is that BNB coins will be exclusively honoring a higher betting value for some of the gaming options. Payment is guaranteed through smart contracts, which means that there are no middlemen involved in the transaction process, and everything is transparent. You can be sure that the funds are in safe hands. And the best part is that you don't have to give up any personal information to get started. So why not join the decentralized revolution and play with peace of mind at BNBP? Start experiencing the benefits of a decentralized casino service. With options like roulette and jackpot currently available, in the future you're going to have more options coming, including sports betting. This isn't a paid promotion, but this is more of a political statement in support of decentralized options. Several trips, and in a way it was really interesting to see because Yan's trips played really well into Omalley's defensive habits, and this is due to the fact that Omalley will often step away. So by using trips, it actually made it easier to dump Omalley. And this is because when Yan tries to trip, Omalley would use his feet and then his feet would be in motion, and since his feet are in motion, they were light on the ground and it became easier to dump or trip him. And then in contrast, when Omalley attempted the same trip, it just didn't really seem to work to Yan's defensive style, and I actually found this pretty amusing. You see, Yan doesn't defensively move too often like Omalley does. In fact, Yan is a lot more likely to plant his feet in position, and this creates a sturdy base, and this makes it harder for Omalley to trip that static foot position when attempting to trip Yan. If Yan was the one to press forward, generally speaking, the fight didn't play well in Omalley's favor. Yan was very careful coming in and used a variety of tools to keep Omalley on the defensive. This meant that Omalley's best option to thrive was to lead, and the moments that he did go on the offensive, he managed to produce a lot of meaningful results. When Omalley had the chance to lead, he would often fight long with the dynamic kicks, often attempting to stab at Yan using those long push kicks, and since Yan is a heavy guard user, Omalley really had to throw off Yan's defensive guard in order to find those openings. There's one specific tactic that seemed to work really well, and based on the number of times that Omalley tried to pull it off, you could tell that his team wanted him to impose this. You could actually hear his corner talk about this too, and this tactic was to dip in order to fake an attack, then he would advance forward with a cross or a jab cross. This was an interesting dynamic because when Omalley did this, it would force Yan on the back foot and force him into using long guard, and sure enough, Omalley was able to connect clean on several occasions. Even more interesting was that it showed how vulnerable Yan could be in this defensive state when he was forced on the back foot. The long guard is typically used in a way where your arms are protruded outwards in order to obstruct the trajectory of the opponent's shots, and this is supposed to help add an additional barrier for the opponent's offensive entries. For example, when Omalley comes to attack, Yan uses that long guard, and you'll notice that part of the chin and part of the arm obstructs the trajectory of Omalley's shot. However, this defense isn't perfect, and Omalley dip step actually played well into countering this kind of defense at times. Here Omalley's gonna throw a dip, and this is gonna prematurely make Yan think that the attack is coming, and this throws off his timing. You're gonna see that he prematurely extends the long guard. Now, he's gonna have to retract that at some point, and Omalley uses that to find the opening with his own power shot. One of the primary benefits of using a dip step is just to throw off the timing of your shot so that you can also throw off the timing of their defenses to find your openings. And this is why feinting with your footwork in this fashion can be really useful to draw out reactions in order to create your openings. So even though Omalley wasn't quite able to land as much on the back foot, he was pretty capable of doing it when he turned it up going on the offensive with tactics like this. In other scenarios, I found Omalley was keen to take advantage of some of Yan's defensive habits. In some of my earlier videos, we explored Yan's defensive habits, and we saw that he often shells up and likes to slip off to the side, but this makes it ideal for knees. Many opponents have been able to exploit this habit, like Aljamain Sterling to Corey Sandhagen, and they did this by drawing him out into hunching over and slipping by probing with their shots, and then using the knees to exploit that. Throughout the fight, Omalley was able to draw Yan out a good number of times to shell up and slip right into his knees. Credit to Yan though, because despite those knees, he's always had a sturdy guard and durable chin to withstand that kind of punishment. This fight was a unique back and forth because Yan and Omalley could thrive exceedingly well at what they do best. Yan could work dangerously from shelling up from his guard, but Omalley could work really well evasively striking long. So as a result, you would see a unique mix of the two finding success at their own games. Omalley would strike long and evade just enough to avoid Yan's retaliation, but Yan could easily find his moments countering off his guard as well. Yan has a tremendous amount of tricks when it comes from working from his shell, and I won't go into all those tricks, but you can watch my previous videos to see some of the signature guard tactics. I do recommend checking them out because you might want to pick up a few of those tricks. The main thing you need to grasp here is that Yan has a very strong sense of timing when it comes to working from his shell guard. He tackles very aggressively in rhythms where you just don't quite expect counters. So even though Omalley could escape just barely from Yan's counters, that wasn't always the case. Yan would find his timing with his signature lead hook counters multiple times as Omalley advanced forward. The other occasion, Yan would fire his same hook counters. This usually came when Omalley lands on one side of Yan's guard, and as soon as he feels it on this side, he fires with the same hand back. Now this tends to land well since his arm is chambered real close to the opponent, and it travels in a straightforward path to connect very quickly. Overall, it wasn't easy trying to find openings in Yan's defenses. When Omalley attempted to feint in order to find openings, Yan would throw occasional leg kicks, and this was helpful because when the opponent is looking to establish feints with their punches, they're usually close enough, but they're pretty far to avoid those punches. So when you're throwing kicks, you're able to connect in a range where they don't quite expect it, so it kind of throws off the rhythm. This made it a little bit hard for Omalley to establish his own offensive entries. Found this to be a very frustrating process because it made it really hard for Omalley to build some kind of offensive rhythm when Yan would interrupt with kicks. When Yan's guard play wasn't taking place, they would often find themselves engaging in hand fighting. From what we last explored, we saw that Yan has quite a few amount of tools to engage in hand fighting. Overall, it seems that Yan had many effective hand fighting tricks to breach that range when this part of the fight played out. When Yan engages in hand fighting, he typically looks to control the opponent's weapons. He'll either do this by drawing the hand out, and as soon as he has control of it, he'll burst right through. Surely enough, Yan was able to do the same thing to stun Omalley as well. He would occupy the hand in some capacity and then breach right through. Here Yan's gonna take control of Omalley's hand, that controls one of his threats, and he manages to sneak the other hand through control the other hand. Then he's gonna pepper a jab in. This allows him to create an opening for him to hop step forward with a power shot. Overall, this fight was quite short. I would have liked it to be a lot longer to 5 rounds so that we could have got a clearer technical perspective of how their styles clash together. Omalley couldn't quite work off too many counters off the back foot, and it says a lot about Yan's competence as a fighter who can intelligently stalk down the opponent. But on the other hand, Omalley was able to pick shots long and find his openings in Yan's defenses, especially in moments where Yan would use the long guard. Yan was tricky the whole time, stalking Omalley down carefully and working that dangerous guard. Yan didn't just excel pressing forward, he also showed that he could thrive playing off counters too, and from how he works from his shell and his ability to work by controlling the hands. From a strategic perspective, I found that Yan had a lot more success working on the defensive or the offensive. Meanwhile, I saw a lot more of Omalley's tactical success coming from going on the offensive and scoring heavy shots in those moments. Both fighters didn't have it easy in this fight, and it's safe to say that both fighters belong at the top at this point in time. And regardless of the outcome, it seems Omalley will continue moving up. But what can this mean moving forward? Omalley will have a difficult road ahead of him with competition because it only gets harder and battles will become a lot more dynamic. This fight taught us a lot, and future opponents may want to pay attention to what worked here.